Welcome to Season 2 of the Hazmat Files, the podcast that dives deep into the stories, challenges, and lessons learned behind hazardous materials response. I'm your host, Erica Fisher, and today's episode is all about reflection, learning from the incidents that tested systems, teams, and decision-making under pressure. Before we get started, a quick note. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of TransCare or its sponsoring organizations. The content provided is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as legal or professional advice. We're joined by 3 railroad hazmat leaders who have responded to some of the most complex rail incidents in recent memory. Clay, Lane, and Brian, I'd like to take a moment to have each of you introduce yourselves.
My name is Clay Reed. I'm the Senior Director of Hazardous Materials for the BNSF Railway.
Lane Sekovic, Senior Manager, Hazardous Materials for Union Pacific in Kansas City.
Brian Shanks, Manager of Hazardous Materials for Norfolk Southern Railroad, based out of St. Louis, Missouri.
Thank you each for joining the podcast today. So glad that you are all willing to walk our listeners through past derailments, close calls, training breakthroughs, and the wisdom that you want every responder to carry with them. Let's kick things off with one of the most powerful forms of learning, experience. Looking back on your career, can you share one incident that taught you the most? What were the key takeaways?
This is Clay Reed. In recent memory, it was Gallup, New Mexico. You might hear it called Lupton, Arizona as well. It's a derailment that happened right on the Arizona-New Mexico border. It was a textbook example of how the incident command system can work and is supposed to work. There was great communication, solid coordination, very well-run derailment, and it proves that if you've ever been in a large incident with incident command, there could be hiccups, but that derailment was run exceptionally well, and it's how it's supposed to work. So at the end of the day, it operated as designed. That was due to a lot of preparation that the local agencies had in the past with training with each other, having drills with each other. They knew what agency was responsible for what. And it's a very well-run derailment.
Brian, how about you?
I think the incident that allowed me to learn the most outside of East Palestine would have been a derailment we had in Gary, Indiana, about 3 or 4 years ago involving 20 cars that derailed. Just bad enough, but it was in a national park. So that created a lot of confusion and misunderstanding of who to contact, who we were working for, along with the environmental impact. There were some pipelines underneath, and it changed how we had to enact utilizing the incident command, unified command, even at non-haz incidents where there is a much different style of impact due to the fact that we have to start making sure we understand whose property, who's involved, who to discuss with, and all the little aspects that can take a scene from being a absolute disaster of communication and making it much better and easier if everybody's on the same page utilizing that incident command, unified command structure.
And last but certainly not least, Lane, what about your incident?
Eric, I actually have 2. One was in Lindell, Utah, which is southwest of Salt Lake City, quite a ways out in the middle of nowhere. At the end of the incident, we explosively vented and burned 11 cars to remove the hazard from the contents. It was liquefied petroleum gas. The lesson I learned there is being able to stand your ground, even though you've got senior railroad management personnel really leaning on you, really pushing on you. There's a right way to do things. There's a wrong way to do things. Hurrying never gets things in a better state. That was the one thing that really reinforced to me that we've got to be able to stand our ground and do the right thing. The other was a derailment in Sibley, Iowa a few years ago where we actually had 9 chemicals released. Training was, and you'll hear this throughout the podcast today, training is a huge, huge item that we push simply because it's important to get the right amount of information to the people, the right information to the people. In this case, the fire chief was a hazmat instructor. He knew what their limitations were. He knew what they didn't want to do. From the fire department side, it was a textbook operation. They didn't intervene. They did a non-intervention. They didn't do nothing. They did non-intervention where it allowed the incident to continue, to run its course until we were able to get enough people, equipment, and all of the things in place to start to manage and deal with the incident much closer.
I feel like each of your stories and incidents really highlight the range of challenges and how strong incident command and establishing those pre-existing relationships can help shape the outcome of the incident. Now let's dig into where things can go wrong. What are some common mistakes or misunderstandings you've seen during hazmat responses on the railroad, and how were they resolved? Brian, we'll start with you.
One of the biggest mistakes and miscommunications I see, and it comes from members of the railroad who are not in the hazmat or environmental impact and some of our first responder agencies, is understanding the difference between an empty and a residue car. A lot of railroad employees will tell you, oh, it's just an empty car. It's just an empty car, because the bulk of our cars, if they're non-haz, when it's empty, but we don't treat any of our hazmat cars as empty. We reference them as residue, as any amount of hazardous material requires placarding, and we have to treat seriously as it could be a threat to life and health. Other issues with that is understanding what the placards mean and what the hazards those present would actually mean when the car is loaded, and if the car has lost its product, if those hazards change, even if the car is placarded prior, as in UN 3257 being hot. Once the product's out of the car, it's no longer hot. So if that's the primary and only hazard, the hazard has been mitigated by the fact that the product is no longer hot.
Lane, how about you? Any common mistakes or misunderstandings that you've seen?
One that I've run into occasionally, Erica, is I'm just going to lump it into product misidentification. They'll hear a name, somebody in the railroad or in the response community will hear a name and think that they know what it is, but they've misunderstood, misinterpreted what was said. I had an incident where for the longest time, everybody was communicating that the product was ethanol, grain alcohol. We're very familiar with that. The product is actually refrigerated ethylene, which is a petroleum-based product, entirely different tank car, entirely different product, entirely different way of handling it. So it took multiple hours and continual stabs at it for them to understand, no, it's not ethanol, it's this, and it's something we have to manage differently.
And to piggyback what Lane said, spelling counts in hazmat. Accuracy matters. Let me give you an example. Sodium chloride versus sodium chlorate. They sound the same, but it's the difference between laryngitis and leprosy, or lightning bugs and lightning bolts. So it matters. And I'm a horrible speller. That's not one of my strong suits. So you have to be very, very careful. And like what Lane was saying, the accuracy of what you're talking about makes a huge difference in your response. And a lot of times we're not minutes away. We're hours away to get there, to get either a contractor or a railroad hazmat manager out on the scene. And then in that time it takes, if we're getting misinformation, we're already going through how we're going to respond or what we're thinking, some options that we could have. And then we get there and find out it's totally something different. Now, we can usually make adjustments pretty quick, but it's a lot better if we just get that good information right from the get-go.
Absolutely. Accuracy definitely counts in all incidents. And miscommunication is something that creeps in even to the most experienced teams, especially in dynamic and high-stress environments. Let's talk about situations that could have gone from bad to worse. Have there been any close call moments where a situation could have escalated but didn't? What made the difference? Brian, we'll start with you.
If we go back to that derailment in Gary, Indiana, I spoke about, our partners in mechanical and transportation's main goal is to get our tracks open and moving freight, because that's what railroads do. Our goal in life is to move stuff from A to B. And they're used to being able to go in our yards and other pieces of our property and just take charge and put things to the side and get the track open. Well, they took the same mentality at this one and started knocking down trees and destroying grasslands, not understanding that that was federally protected national park land. And federal park rangers and other existing agencies that were there were not too thrilled about that mentality about wrecking stuff to get the railroad open. So we had to step in the environmental role and work with mechanical employees and transportation and get the Federal Park Service on board to understand that while I am not a proponent of what is happening here, this is unfortunately what's already happened, and we will do everything in our power to restore this property back to existing, if not better, conditions after this has been done. And that got everybody on the same page. We stopped damaging more equipment, came up with a better plan. And then after all the product was cleaned up, which was just bentonite clay, so naturally occurring product, we restored all of their property back to as good or better in the eyes of the federal parkland.
And Lane, how about you? Any close call moments you've experienced?
Erica, your preface was could have gone from bad to worse. This one didn't. It was one I wasn't directly involved with, but we had a grade crossing collision that one of my counterparts was working down in the southern part of our system. He job briefed with everyone that the grade crossing was saturated with a flammable liquid from the collision, explained that we can't do hot work, we can't do torch work, we can't do any grinding. I don't want to say it was literally as he walked away, but he wasn't very far away before he heard the distinctive ka-whoosh of the flammable liquid igniting, basically blasting through the grade crossing. I'm not going to say it exploded and threw things everywhere, but it was very distinctive, got everybody's attention that happened to be standing there that caused it. Even when we job briefed and explained all the risks, this was a close enough call that people should have recognized it on the front end, but they realized exactly what the risk was after they had caused it, and it played out exactly like he had said.
In Clay, throughout your career, are there any incidents that could have gone from bad to worse?
Yes, but kind of talking about what Lane talked about, everybody's going to have their work group. They're going to get briefed. Everybody's going to have a job to do. When you have, I hate to say freelancing, but I'll say freelancing, that somebody decides to do something that's not in the plan, they're just kind of going off and doing their own thing, that usually causes more delays than it does help. And if there's an injury or something, a stand down and work, and obviously increased risk. So I'm not saying that you're going to be rigid in your processes when you get an assignment. You have to be able to call audibles in the field when you're out there working, because you can armchair quarterback it to death, but until you've got wrenches on something or you're doing an activity, you're going to have to make small modifications. But going just completely outside of the scope of work to go try and do something else that really nobody's briefed about or we've talked about or anything like that, that can cause big problems.
Absolutely. And all of those what if moments really often teach us more than even those that go by the book. They also remind us why ICS and communication really matter. Now let's zoom out a little bit. How have hazmat rail incident responses evolved over the years? Clay, let's start with you.
I've been doing this a long time, and I'd say that when you compare how things were done in the early to mid 90s, I think that safety is now a central priority. And I think now that we have some really good safety briefing now, it's a focal point. It's more important than anything else we're going to do. And I think that's really taken center stage, and not necessarily, it's the work getting done efficiently, quickly, but safely. And people being able to say, hey, stop, I don't like this. Let's talk about this before we continue doing what we're doing. So I think that the safety culture, especially at the BNSF, has really, in my 15 years here, has really always been a big priority, a lot more than when I was in my contractor life years ago, when it might not necessarily been the primary focus.
And Brian, how about for you? How have you seen responses evolve over your years with the railroads?
Not to steal Clay's thunder, but safety is the priority number one out there. And I think what we have done is look a little bit more towards the safety of the following days and weeks of work that need to be required. So instead of just putting the track back in and then worrying about how we're going to clean up with trains whizzing by, that we have now instituted that the hazmat team, environmental and safety, get together to determine that we have done the most amount of gross decon that we can of a site and do some preemptive work to allow the track to go back in and keep less visits out there and less work near the railroad having to happen. So the track can't go in until the hazmat and safety departments have agreed that we've done the best we can do in the time frame that we've allotted ourselves to do it before we let the train start running and having to work in a more dangerous situation with trains going by at mainline speed doing environmental restoration work.
And Lane, how about you?
While it's been a snail's pace in getting there, I'm seeing a little bit more internal collaboration and buy-in, not evidenced by the example I gave you for the last question by any stretch of the imagination, but we're seeing more where the middle management and the first line managers understand the hazmat and environmental remediation work a little bit more. They understand why we have to do what we do. We still fight the old mindset of we've got to clear the main, we've got to get track in, we've got to start moving trains. In some sense, velocity is still king, moving freight is still king. But we're able to get them to understand through some regular contacts, and one of my colleagues used to call it in-reach. We do a lot of outreach, but we also do a lot of in-reach with our managers and staff to help them figure out how important this work is.
It's really encouraging to hear that safety is the number one priority and that internal collaboration continues to grow. But sometimes it does take a major event to spark real change within companies. Is there an incident that changed the way your railroad now trains or equips its internal teams? Brian, we'll have you kick that one off.
So we have two incidents. The first one would have been in Albers, Illinois. That was very similar to the one that was mentioned earlier, where we spilled a flammable liquid. They were told not to do hot work, and it seems almost miraculously, once that was said, hot work started, and we had a fire in a field. And then East Palestine, or post East Palestine, encouraged us that the folks that are doing that type of work, our maintenance away brothers, should be receiving a more in-depth training in regards to the outfits and areas they might be working. So we have a Hazwapper style training program for, I think, 30 or 40 of our union maintenance away employees that will come and understand how the incident command structure works, unified command, a little bit more about hazmat in general, so that when we do get to a scene, they have a spokesperson that can be inside the incident command structure, not to push the plan forward or make bigger decisions about how the scene should be handled, but so that they can better speak to the brothers on the ground who will be doing the work in areas, and they can have a good faith challenge policy from the guy swinging the hammer or using the torch all the way up to the incident command structure, and be able to say, hey, I don't understand what's going on. This is what I heard out here. What is actually happening? They're going to get one direct feed from the incident command structure to the folks on the ground in the field doing that track work.
And Clay, how about for you? Any major incident that changed the way your railroad now trains or equips its teams?
I don't think there's a single event. We've always, as a team, been very good about constant evolution of gears, tools, tactics, lessons learned from derailments. And we've evolved over the years and added more tools to the toolbox. It's a continuously improving process in the way we want to look at doing things.
And Lane, how about for Union Pacific?
Similar to Clay, not one single incident, but one of the things we've done over the years and refined it a little bit at a time, we actually will create or start a backseat manager when we have significant incidents. People in the field have plenty to do without trying to answer multiple items or multiple issues of the same question from various parts of the system, various parts of the organization. We had a derailment just yesterday where the backseat manager, we sent out an initial notification. Here's who you call for questions, with a big note at the bottom. Do not call the field managers. Spotty cell coverage. They've got plenty to do. You call the backseat manager. That lets the field folks do everything they need to and not be interrupted multiple times. That lets the backseat manager do all the logistics, looking up information, digging up contacts, those types of things. So we continue to refine that little by little.
Those are all great lessons learned throughout the numerous years you guys have been involved. It's always evolving and changing. And as you said, Clay, adding those tools and resources to the toolbox always helps both internal and external teams. Let's shift gears. There's often a disconnect between what rail hazmat professionals know and what local responders believe. Let's try to close some of that gap. What's one thing you wish every first responder understood about responding to a railroad hazmat incident? Brian, do you want to start?
For our first responders, EMAs, whoever may be on the site, their first and foremost goal should be fire and life safety and community protection. They need to worry about making sure they understand what they're approaching. Are they doing it uphill, upwind? Do they know the commodities? Do they have paperwork? And gathering as much of that information as possible, and then starting up the incident command and eventually becoming a unified command structure and bringing the railroad in, not getting 100 hand lines out there and every piece of equipment they can think of to try to attack the problem. Information gathering is the first and foremost thing based on their community protection guidelines.
And Lane, how about you? What do you wish every first responder understood?
That they don't have to spend a dime to get railroad training, Erica. We do free training, we do weekends, we do evenings, we do volunteers, we do career. We're the SMEs for railroad and tank car response. It's a very small community that we live in across the railroads and our contractor network. But rather than spending very tight budget dollars on having a consultant come in, if you call Clay or Brian or me, we're going to come out and do the training free, and we'll give you every piece of information that we possibly can.
And Clay, what do you wish everybody knew?
Similar, following up what Lane said, you're not alone when there's a derailment. Help's coming. Work with your railroad managers. And on derailments, it's a marathon, not a sprint, but you will be amazed at how fast derailments get cleaned up and trains start moving again. It's not a matter of minutes, but it's surprising about how much work can be done in a short amount of time.
Those are such important reminders. There's such a wealth of railroad expertise, free training, and knowing that the hazmat managers are just a phone call away. Now, we've talked a little bit previously about misunderstandings that can still show up during incident response. What do you think is most misunderstood about rail hazmat responses amongst the first responder community? Clay, do you want to kick us off there?
Just understand this. The propane in the tank car that's derailed is the same propane that's in your barbecue gas cylinder. Perspective, it's in a larger container. I use this especially with fire departments all the time. I'll ask them, how many of you been in a garage fire or a barn or a shop fire? Most everybody raises their hands. And I'll say, when you rolled up, did they give you an inventory of what was in that shop or that barn? They'll say no. And I'll say, but what you did is you pulled hand lines and you entered a confined space with a bunch of unknown chemicals and started spraying water on it. And they'll nod their head yes. And then I'll use, if you went to my shop behind my house, compressed gases, herbicides, pesticides, flammable liquids, combustible liquids, all these unknown chemicals. And they went in there without any information. On a train derailment, you're going to have a list of all the cars, their contents, on the hazmat especially. And it's outdoor sport, so you can always get uphill, upwind. And so if you'll break it down like that, let's just think about what you're going up against. You can use terrain and wind to get close enough to start identifying cars and understanding what you got, but we're going to tell you what's in those cars. So you're not going in a confined space with hazardous materials. If you think about the perspective and what you're really getting into, we give you a whole lot more information than what you're going to get most of the time. Even in a house fire, we're going to give you all this type of information. So I think that's one thing that's misunderstood.
You make a really great point there. Perspective really does matter when it comes to rail incidents. Lane, what do you think is most misunderstood?
Well, I'm going to pile on Clay's comment. People tend to lose their perspective, lose their sight of an incident when they see or get dispatched to a railroad emergency, especially involving tank cars. They think that tank cars are this incredibly different thing, quote unquote thing, and they don't recognize, like Clay said, it's the same LPG that's in the small container that's in the tank car. We've even had incidents where they wanted to start evacuating neighborhoods based on it being a tank car incident, not realizing that it was beef tallow or corn oil or something else that was completely non-haz, not from the environmental sense necessarily, but because they saw tank car and railroad, it just completely blows their perspective out of the water to where it's a real challenge getting the incident started just because they have gone so far to one side of the spectrum.
And Brian, how about from your perspective?
2 points, really. One, just to go back to what Clay and Lane said, it's the same product in a different container, but that container that our hazmat is carried in is by far one of the best ways to carry it. They are built to handle all the stressors that come from daily railroad use and the abnormal times they get flung around. They are very robust and can handle a lot more wear and tear than that barbecue cylinder that is neglected and sat outside underneath your grill during the winter. One of the other things is that I think, and I've heard from other FDs and other response agencies, is that the railroad comes in and just takes over, or we just get to go home. We don't. We come in, we are a partner in this. We are not the authority having jurisdiction. The fire department in many states, sometimes it's the police department, but we come in and we need to be invited in and fall under that unified command structure to be able to provide all of our assistance, whether it's knowledge, money, and equipment, whatever it is. But we can't come in and just take over. We have to be invited in and be a partner at the scene.
Those are such great points. And it's definitely important to stress that partnership and collaboration between the responding agencies and the railroad on the incident. The visual impact of a tank car can definitely drive fear before facts. Let's discuss what it looks like when a rail incident call comes in to first responders. Can you each walk us through what responders should expect during the first 30 minutes of a rail hazmat incident? Brian, do you want to start?
Yeah, that first 30 minutes outside of the crew having the consist and the paperwork, the first thing that fire department, whether it's that first engine in, first bell in, should be gathering as much information, whether it's getting the consist directly from the crew if available, calling the blue sign and talking to our dispatch centers, calling Chemtrek to get paperwork, using Ask Rail. All of this comes down to is getting that piece of information that tells you that list of cars that is in that train. Once you have that, you know what's there, what's not there, where the car likely will be, and what hazards you're going to face. You're going to be able to start triaging liquids versus gases, because at that time, there is likely no hazmat manager anywhere nearby. And the people that you will interact with first, all they're going to really be able to give you is that paperwork. So you need to take a breath and assess everything you can, the weather conditions, the site. Are you uphill, upwind? Is there culverts? Is there waterways? Gathering as much information for any inbound tech or subject matter expert to be able to help make really sound decisions for the upcoming operational periods.
And Clay, what do you think responders should expect in those first 30 minutes?
I've seen 2 derailments that were years apart. Both of them were in drought conditions. Both of them were very small volunteer departments. And they had derailments, and both of these derailments, fire was involved. Those fire departments had the mindset that we can't tackle this derailment. And so what we're going to do is what we can do. In both these instances, the departments knew of the drought situation and the potential for very large wildfires to sprout up. And in both situations, they cut fire lines around the derailment. They contained the fire to a much smaller area than where it would have been the very rural locations. And those folks, you really have to commend their decision-making abilities. The thought process is, where can we put our resources to have the biggest impact? And so while people might not think about the fire spreading, getting away from the derailment side and impacting miles possibly of wildland and all that kind of stuff, those 2 departments, in my opinion, did a great job of understanding what their capabilities were and where they could have the biggest impact. And so it might be that they're plugging up culverts or bar ditches or making sure that something doesn't go into a creek, and that can be done at a safe distance. Let's say you don't have hazmat techs in your fire department. There are so many other things that can be done that really have a big impact on the overall derailment cleanup and keeping the site safe.
Those initial responders just really focusing on the defensive actions versus having to worry too much about offensive in that first 30 minutes.
Don't get tunnel vision.
Absolutely. And Lane, what would you say responders should expect in the first 30 minutes?
I hate to use this word, Erica, but chaos is really what's going to happen in the first half hour if it's a reasonably sized railroad hazmat incident. By chaos, I mean the incident commander is going to be flooded with information that's changing. What he knows at 5 minutes in may be 180 degrees from what he knows at 35 minutes in. So in addition to being flooded with info, some of which may or may not be right, 100% right, 50% right, he has the challenge of managing those communications, that communication flow, and being able to use that info. So I tell fire departments when I do my training that if you need a scribe, if you need a runner, whatever you need to help you manage it, if you need to turn off your phone for 15 minutes to be able to manage your incident, but making sure they manage the incident and that information flow to their benefit, not to them getting weighed down and bogged down and overwhelmed with it.
Taking that time to just take a breath, take a step back, and make sure they understand what's the best they can do for the incident and what are their capabilities and their training abilities. That early window is critical and full of uncertainty, but this is why pre-planning makes such a difference. How can first responders better collaborate with railroads before an incident occurs? Lane?
You've heard me say this before, Erica. Training. It's free. Ask us. We'll show up. Pre-planning is a challenge because we're not a building at 400 Elm Street. Our physical plant is 30,000 miles long and 100 feet wide. So pre-planning for an incident is challenging in a specific location, but they can pre-plan for an incident that happens anywhere in their response territory. So it's important that you get us out there. It gives them a face to connect to and somebody to make friends with so that when they have an incident in their community, there's already an understanding of what that railroad brings to the table as far as assets, knowledge, information, tools, equipment, etc.
Clay, what do you think first responders can do to better collaborate with the railroads?
I'd say it goes back to pre-planning. So one thing a local department can do is if you have a rail yard in your jurisdiction, Go to that rail yard. Go talk to the people. There's usually a tower there or an office building. Find out who you can talk to there. I'll ask fire departments, I'll say, do y'all know where the fire hydrants are located in a rail yard? So they're going to be at the perimeter, and a lot of times they're privately owned. And have they tested them? Do you know how to get into the rail yard? Do you know all the entrances and exits? If we had something, let's say, in the rail yard, would they know the proper way to enter that rail yard, uphill, upwind, and all that kind of stuff? One thing I'll tell fire departments as well is have a protocol. And I'll implore them actually to take a piece of paper and write down, if you got a yard, have that schematic in their units, have the railroad 1-800 number for the railroad, some tips on sizing things up, maybe have some references on there that you can look up, because it's a perishable skill. If you're not responding to train incidents, you might forget some things. And have that laminated, put it in all the rigs, and you need to practice like you would a structure fire. So once, twice a year, whatever it is, you need to pull out that laminated sheet and figure out, hey, here's our protocols, here's how we're going to do this. Check to make sure phone numbers still worked, hadn't changed for the local folks. I think that's where your pre-planning really comes in, is where you really think about how this is going to work, means of egress and access to the local yards, and then your local folks. Building that relationship, just like if you had a plant that was making XYZ chemical, hopefully you're going and visiting that facility and understanding how that facility operates. Have that same kind of mindset when it comes to rail yards. Getting those relationships, getting your mindset on how to respond to this, and having a plan on how you're going to respond is big.
And that relationship building is such a critical element of pre-planning. Brian, what would you recommend first responders do in order to collaborate better with the railroads?
To steal from Lane and Clay a little bit, there's two different places that derailment can happen: in a rail yard or out in the main line. For a rail yard, it's understanding how to get in and get out, but also what commodities are going to be there. So requesting a traffic flow study for the yard, your jurisdiction, that piece of main line that comes through, and knowing the chemicals that could come through. You can request that from any of the Class 1 railroads that operate in your jurisdiction, so you can know that, hey, I have to worry about chemicals X, Y, and Z, so we can practice and plan for those chemicals. Out in the main line and in some yards, the big thing is understanding what happens if you have that grade crossing incident, that derailment, and we've blocked 5 or 6, 7 of your crossings, and that is the only way to get around your town. So pre-planning for detours and delays, mutual aid calls, to know how to get to uphill, upwind, or the other side of a derailment site, or even if it's just for a medical call in another part of your jurisdiction where we blocked part of your town off, knowing where that can happen and how you'd get around is a big, huge, important thing for everybody to understand.
You guys all offered such great advice on pre-planning. Now let's talk about resources. There are powerful tools out there, some of which might not be being used to their full potential. Which railroad resources or tools are often overlooked or underused by first responders? Clay, we'll start with you.
First and foremost is Ask Rail, then FRA Railroad Crossing Locator. These are both apps that you can get off the App Store. The AAR Field Guide to Tank Cars, which you can access through the Ask Rail app, and the NIOSH database is great information, and then the basic ERG.
And Brian, what about you?
I think knowing what railroads operate in your area, who the hazmat managers are, the phone numbers associated with not just the railroad, but in a lot of instances, that hazmat manager. I'm not stating you should call them directly first. We do have vacation time where we may not be able to answer, but knowing who to call at each one of the railroads when it comes to that hazmat emergency or any rail incident, so that you can have that first call, because the call is going to come through and it's going to take 2 or 3 or 4 different calls to get to us. So if we can get that call and start giving you information and either helping you take that breath to do your site assessment, or let you know that, hey, this is just a non-haz tallow car, it's got a dent in it, nothing's leaking, can help slow down everybody's heart rate and let them attack the problem less emotionally and more analytically.
Yes, making that call to the operating railroad in the area as a first step for any rail incident is critical. Lane, what about you? Any specific resources or tools?
Nothing railroad specific, Erica, but recognizing that air monitoring, drones, the basics for any hazmat incident are what they're going to use on a railroad incident. They don't need special tools. The things that they are used to responding with and using in their day-to-day hazmat responses, I'm going to flip all the way back to the earlier question of it's not a different thing just because it's in a big tank car. 33,000 gallons of LPG is the same as 5 gallons of LPG. It's just a bigger quantity. So being able to use the tools that they do every day and be very adept at it, that lets them get the data in real time, be able to interpret the data, be able to make use of that to help them manage that incident, to eat that elephant one bite at a time, but doing it with the knowledge.
Now that we've looked back at key incidents, how the industry has grown, and tools and resources, let's talk about something just as important: bridging the gap between railroad hazmat professionals and local first responders. Because when expectations don't align, even the best plans can fall apart. If you each had a magic wand, what would you change or improve about the way we prepare for rail hazmat incidents nationally? Lane, we'll let you kick that one off.
Eric, if I had my magic wand, I would have every first responder, fire department, EMS, anybody that's going to respond to a railroad hazmat incident, go through a tank car safety course. The initial tank car safety course gives them enough information to let them manage an incident if it happens in their territory. And it also lets them understand that basic tools like pipe wrenches, seal cutters, binoculars, those things do a lot of the horsepower at an incident. I don't have any magic tools in my truck. I've got the things that the fire department has in theirs. It's just they don't recognize how useful a single 24-inch pipe wrench can be at a railroad hazmat incident, specifically involving tank cars, but it's across the board. The simple things are really what we use day to day today.
And how about you, Clay?
I would say I agree 100% with Lane, but if a person would just visit all the Class 1 railroad online training, taking the time and getting online, it doesn't cost you a dime. You can do it whenever you have an opportunity. There's no travel costs and all that. So there's just so much online free training that's out there, and it gives a great baseline. So after you had the online training, I think if you had in-person training, it's going to be a lot more valuable because then we can answer any questions that you may have had from that online training.
And Brian, if you were given a magic wand, how would you change or improve the way we're preparing for hazmat incidents nationally?
Well, I think in a perfect world, if we had that magic wand, we would just not have any more hazmat railroad incidents. However, since this one's capped off, I'd really like to see if we can get some more volunteer and rural departments more training and allow them to get better and more training, not just on rail incidents, but tech level, tank car specialists, flammable liquids, affirm, all these different things that are a lot easier for a full-time paid department to be able to justify sending people to and coming back. I wish it was a lot easier for those folks to get it because let's be honest, most of the railroads in the middle of rural areas, out in the middle of nowhere where they don't have full-time paid departments, volunteer departments have day jobs and other things they have to focus on too and can't always go and make these trainings. And that's who's going to be handling one of these incidents.
Training has definitely been the theme throughout this podcast. And I agree, the more training we can offer, the more jurisdictions we can reach, the better. And it's really hard to say no to free training. Be sure to visit transcare.com to see the upcoming Transcare tank car safety courses being hosted by the Class 1 railroads in partnership with our program this year. Rail safety training is also available online 24/7 on the Transcare Learning Management System at www.hazmatcourses.com. Clay, Brian, Lane, thank you for taking the time to share your insights, your experience, and your lessons learned. These aren't just stories. They're blueprints for better, safer responses and increased first responder preparedness. To our listeners, rail hazmat incidents don't wait for ideal conditions. But with the right training, communication, and coordination with the railroads operating in your community, you can meet them head on. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to check out Transcare's newest Seconds Count video, Responding to Railroad Hazmat Incidents, the first 12 hours for first responders. Visit transcare.com to watch it today. As always, stay safe, stay prepared, and we'll see you next time on the Hazmat Files.